All right, good morning, lords and lady. This is, I think I've lost track in terms of how many episodes we've done. So anyway, we'll title it more on the topic rather than the number. This is the post-draft power rankings, part 1. Why is it possibly more than one part? Because I'm expecting a dryer to be delivered today. So I may have to cut this short, but I'll get through all 32 if I can. But otherwise, the idea here is to go through all 32 teams and basically talk about where they stand in terms of their future for this year or further on, and then how they stack up in terms of tiers that I set up, and I'll be posting this to the blog site afterwards anyway. But again, to get into the meat of the podcast anyway, unfortunately I'm doing this by myself. We weren't able to schedule a time to get Reed, Eric, or Jeremy on the pod at night, so we'll knock this out, just me, and then we'll try and get another one focused on the second part of the draft, as well as just kind of get their feedback on these rankings as well in the coming weeks. Anyways, talking through the tiers themselves, I split this into 6 tiers. First off, again, we'll start from the bottom. As I've named it, and now the rain weeps o'er their halls with not a soul to hear, which those of you who have either recently read the books or know way too much about the lore of these books, Jeremy, those are lyrics from the Reigns of Castamere. So again, the people in this tier are at risk for being Castamered. Next is a term I'd never heard before, but then we heard as part of a video clip shared yesterday in the chat. It's called Ass in the Jackpot, which apparently I think means teams that are at risk or in a tough situation. And Ump kept saying it to the guy he was throwing out. So thought it was a fun term. Figured I'd integrate it into the podcast. Point is, teams in a tough situation, likely top 10 picks next year, but each of them has some interesting decisions to make this season. Next, again, instead of calling it the middle class, I think a better way to say it is, as one Peter Baelish said, chaos is a ladder. It's an opportunity. And really, these teams have an opportunity to either push for a playoff spot or kind of fall back, blow it up, rebuild, and really push for it next year. But again, I think kind of across the board, there's something for each team that really lends itself to the chaos mantra here. Next after that, we have our tournament challengers, whether that be in a wild card position or a division champion position. These are the teams that we expect to be in the hunt, really relying on those winter games to get themselves in there. Second to last, we have Lords of their regions, also playoff teams, but likely competing for buys, not necessarily playoff spots, probably the higher tier of division winners. And then last but not least, the Clash of Kings, favorites for the crown, and folks that the Bearmen have already started aligning behind and predicting as their favorites to win. So, as I mentioned, we're going to start at the bottom, and the fun part about the Castamere tier that I didn't realize until I actually started going through these rankings was all 4 teams I have in this tier are from the Ice Division. So definitely another year of feast or famine for teams in Ice. But that being said, Team 32, no surprise to the Soner, as he's been really blowing things up anyway since last year and continuing with some recent trades, is House Baelish. Really last year, after rough start with his quarterbacks, instead of trying to double down, he really pushed back to get his pick back from me, to get other picks, and to begin a rebuild. He had a pretty successful draft this year, but with Jackson and Allen as his quarterbacks, I think also has Foles. He's not really someone to worry about in that regard this year, and has already broken up DJ for pieces, and likely will do so with A-Rob soon. So I think he's expecting for his team not to be very good, and really has relied on pieces that will improve next year with free agency. Coleman is a piece like that. Again, Ronald Jones is a rookie that he's brought in who may need a year to really secure that spot in Tampa. And then I think Crowder is a free agent next year, so may have an increased role to whatever team he goes to. But Point being, Baelish is currently bringing up the rear at 32. I don't think anyone's going to be truly surprised by that, or by 31. A team that got taken over either in the offseason or late last season, I can't recall, but House Bolton is ranked 31st. Again, another team in the midst of a rebuild. A lot of his fate is going to be tied to camp battles, particularly at the quarterback position. Tyrod, Rosen, and McCarron looked like they were going to be 3 starters, or could be 3 starters coming into the season, or they could go 3 backups if Mayfield wins the job in Cleveland. They stick with Bradford in Arizona, and either Allen or Peterman, God forbid, win the job in Buffalo. On the running back position, Mack is looking like he's moving towards a timeshare. And even though Hearn seems to be the front runner for the Dallas wide receiver 1 job, it's still early. Gallup could catch him. A lot could still happen there. So much to come on that regard. Again, the question is going to be, if he gets lucky and everything breaks his way, how high does he really think he's going to rise this year? Or is it a great opportunity for him to sell those pieces as well as Julio? I'm banking towards the latter, which is why I've got him 31st. Next, we have Brotherhood Without Banners at 30th. Again, another team who's embraced the rebuild, has started breaking up pieces such as Stafford for picks, young players, and less reliable options at positions. The real question is going to be, again, how far he's willing to go for the rebuild. Again, I expect he's still going to flip Dalton, Richard Matthews, and a couple other players as they're necessary with injuries to contenders to pick up some draft capital or young players. The other side of it's going to be when or if OBJ becomes available, because he's probably his best avenue to rebuild. But without making him available, it's going to take a couple of years to wait for the draft and wait for these players to really step up. He picked up Jackson, I think, who was the other copy was the 102 or 103, so 102A. So again, he's adding the right way, but the speed in which he's able to really return to relevance is going to depend on what he's willing to do with OBJ. Next up, we have House Egan at 29th, and this is the end of the Castamere tier. Again, these are who I believe are the bottom 4 teams, regardless of them all being nice. That said, again, he keeps causing trouble for himself from a possible points perspective, so he's likely to end up as a top 5 pick. I think he acknowledges that and is being very wary about moving his picks this year. But that said, he's also had a pretty lucky offseason. Luck, pun partially intended, with Luck throwing again. But then both of his starting running backs, Drake and Collins, made it through the draft and free agency without really any major competition being added, with the potential exception of Balaj, who was a 5th rounder, but he's traded for Balaj anyway, or the return of Dixon. But again, with Dixon's track record, he's just as likely to end up on the suspension list again or the injured list again before we even get to training camp. So again, Egan, I think, has also realized he's in a bit of a rebuild, but at the same time likes to make deals to make sure he's relevant on a week-to-week basis. So again, could he sell his picks again to try and squeak out a 5-11 season or 5-9 season and end up with a top 5 pick? Or does he kind of blow it up, start moving, breaking down Luck, breaking out his running backs while he can, and starting to rebuild? Because without really a reliable receiver or tight end, this is not a team that is ready to compete. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. But again, those are the bottom 4 teams as I see them. Next up, as mentioned, we have the second tier, which is the ass in the jackpot. Again, like I said, each of these teams have a little bit of risk associated with their team, and some tough decisions to make. But again, I don't think that they're really at risk for Castamere, except for, of course, the required fire Castamere that's likely to come. But I think that both the fire teams in this tier are a step above the 4 that are in the Castamere tier. 28th is our first fire team, House Casterly. It's everyone's favorite Eagles lover. Won his division the first year, then promptly blew up his team and started stockpiling anything that came from Philadelphia. So again, team's coming together well. If Darnold does win that starting job in New York, Mixon takes the next step at running back. If Blount's goal line carries go to Ajayi, then this ranking rises. But he's got some spotty depth behind Cooks, questions at tight end. Both the previous backup to Ertz and now the current backup to Ertz at tight end in Goddard and Burton. But again, it's tough to really see this team winning a lot of games. And again, especially if Darnold doesn't start, this is a team that's likely favored to be Castemered. Now, granted, if Darnold wins the job, and like I said, his running backs step it up, then he probably moves up into the chaos ladder tier, and we're not, really relying on these conversations. I know Casterly will probably blast this for his players every week as a no losing us, or change his avatar in chat to the dog mask because now he gets to embrace the underdog mantra, just like his Eagles did last year. But again, it does make me a little bit happy from a lore perspective to see Casterly being at risk of being Castemered, since I believe again, it was a Lannister family involved in the reigns of Castamere and the Castamere family. But again, since their house is Casterly Rock, there's still some parallel to be drawn there. All right, moving to 27, House Stark. Again, his goal this offseason and per his trade bait was to get younger quarterback and add young quarterbacks. With a selection of Rosen to put next to Deshaun Watson, I'd say he's accomplished that goal. Putting that with Kamara and Cohen at running back, he's got a nice little young core to cause a couple of upsets. The receiver and tight end are probably a year away from being truly relevant. Looking at how that stacks up here, except for Woods and Nanunwa, it's tough to really rely on either Ridley or Pettis to step right in year one, although they're probably some of the more likely to of these rookies. It's tough to really rely on them. And then John, who needs another year. Schultz might win that Dallas job. I think it's kind of going a couple of different ways at this point. But especially considering the competition in the North, he's probably not really a playoff team yet. So really some decisions to be made around Woods and Unwa. Can he flip those for assets for next year? Donta Foreman, again, may need another year as well. So 2019 looks to be the year for Stark. But again, it's a question of what does he do with some of the 2018 pieces he has. Next up, it's everyone's favorite trader. Not trader as in the Benedict Arnold way of thinking, but trader as in Trader Joe's. But now it's actually Trader Tyrell that we're talking about. Has once again cycled his team with a priority of adding youth at quarterback, as well as many rookie picks as he could get his hands on, as he dealt them and traded down and did all sorts of fun things in the draft this year. One of the approaches he's taken, which is a high risk, high reward, and he may have done it last year. I need to go back and see what my postseason review was saying. But he has Trubisky and Tannehill at quarterback, which again makes him younger than he was before. He's got a couple of questions around running back position in terms of Tevin and KJ. KJ, I mean, of course, Kerryon Johnson. Then he's got 7 receivers that I could see being wide receiver 2s, or I could see really falling out of relevance. What I mean is looking at, again, the other copy of Anunwa, Chris Godwin, Marquise Goodwin, Marquise Lee, Sterling Shepard, James Washington, and Michael Williams. So again, from both a youth perspective and a situation perspective, I could see maybe 3 of those turning into wide receiver 2s this year. Again, given the dearth of depth or talent in New York, you can see anyone taking back that wide receiver 1 role. Godwin is a favorite to make a leap this year. Goodwin just got signed to a receiver 2 contract. But point being, he could potentially pull 3 or 4 wide receiver 2s out of this bunch, or everyone gets relegated to 3 duty, and he's really got no one he can rely on. So that, as well as the timeshare that Doyle finds himself in now with Ebron in Indianapolis, as well as Jordan Reed's continuous concussions. Outside of quarterback, Tyrell is taking on a lot of risk. Again, he could get lucky and it could break in his favor, and he ends up back in the playoff conversation again, to everyone's surprise. Or this could be the year that Tyrell pick becomes a top 10 rather than that playoff first that it's been the last couple of years. And then the last of the the ass in the jackpot is the Night's Watch, ranked 25th. Again, another team that is going to face a really tough decision. I think he's probably got the toughest decision to make here because the lineup's not bad. Again, the starters are probably looking like Eli, Alex Smith, Lamar Miller, Jay Ajayi, Marvin Jones, Vance McDonald, and then pick them as you want to based off of matchups. Two more flexes of Ronald Jones, C.J. Anderson, Tyrell Williams, and Paul Richardson. So again, based off of matchups, if it looks like if Anderson does get that between the tackles role, he could play based off of whether Anderson has a good rushing matchup, whether Williams picks up the extra targets in San Diego, etc. But I can see this team scoring 90 on a weekly basis. And that said, if you put 90 points a game in my schedule last year, again, say what it will about Fire versus Ice, and oh my God, who's got the toughest division? 90 a game would have gone 10-4 with my record last year, which would have made the playoffs in Fire. And maybe Ice, I can't remember. But point being, that's not bad. And having a floor like that could really help this team. Like I said, unfortunately, he has to play Children, Free Folk, and White Walkers twice each, which means, again, from a record perspective, he's not likely to make it there. So the question is going to be, does he keep the core intact, saying, hey, this is a team that could surprise if injuries break the right way, he could see himself in the wild card, or does he take these pieces and blow them up and rebuild? But the question is, again, these aren't sexy names, really. Eli, Alex Smith, Lamar Miller. Like, these aren't players that are going to go for, multiple firsts. So as we look at the team, he's got really a tough decision. His ass is truly in a jackpot because he'll make enough points to be a mid-first, and again, his win-loss won't be great, but at the same time, blowing it up is going to be very difficult too. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he approaches the rest of this offseason to see whether he's able to ride the news cycle to flip guys like Anderson, Tyrell Williams, Ajayi, Miller, stuff like that, or if he keeps it intact and says, look, I'm going to ride these guys as long as I can as I develop behind them. So two very good strategies, and we'll see which one he takes. All right, next is our third tier, Chaos is the Ladder. And much as with the previous tiers, there's definitely a chaos theme to each of these teams that I will go into as I review them. 24th, we have House Lannister. So again, no better way to start this tier than with the Lannisters. Well, I'm sorry, actually, Baelish would be better, but maybe next year, maybe if he doesn't get Castamir'd, we'll see. The point being, this team is probably going to have the highest variance in their score from a week-to-week basis of any team in the league. And what I mean by that is, outside of Carr, and he's basically outside of Carr and Rudolph, he's starting 7 players who will have their receptions vary wildly from a week-to-week basis. So his receiving core is quite solid. Michael Thomas, A.J. Green, Adam Thielen, Crabtree, Cup. That's a pretty solid receiving core. From a running back perspective, both pass catchers or satellite back pluses, Duke Johnson and Devonta Booker, and then tight end is Kyle Rudolph. So again, he's got a lot of his points tied up in the passing game, which can be a great thing if you need to score a lot of points, or it can be a really shitty thing if it's not your week in terms of where the ball bounces. So outside of probably a good floor with Carr, again, I wouldn't be shocked to see this team put up 50 one week and 150 the next. So that kind of variance is not something you can really count on to get you to the wild card position, or let alone to a division title. So unless he's able to bring in a couple of pieces with, say, a Green or a Thielen or Michael Thomas even, that raises his points floor to a level that he's seeing 70 or 80 on a weekly basis, and then those receptions put him over the top, I don't think this is a playoff team. Again, due to the variance, I could be completely wrong. 3 of his receivers could go off each week with Carr, put up 100 points a week, and bingo bango, he's winning the Westerlands. But again, that little variance isn't something I can really endorse. Anyways, next up, we have the 23rd ranked team, House Bulwer. Again, really simple premise in terms of Bulwer's team. It's been the same as I think we started. Again, get the 2 young quarterbacks. I believe it's Winston Mariota. Yep. Again, then tons of high potential receivers that he took in the startup draft, and he's been adding to as we've gone, and then the rest is building through. Started out really strong last year due to the explosion that was Kareem Hunt, but again, due to that trade, probably ends up on the wrong side of it. But this team is rising in the right direction. If Wentz is able to come back strong, he's got Wentz and Mariota, Cook, Christian McCaffrey, and Geis at running back. The question is really going to be at the receiver position. He traded Hunt for Corey Davis, which was a great idea at the time. But again, Davis has to make that jump to be a wide receiver one for it to pay off for him. Funchess Godwin and Cam Meredith are attractive receiver twos or potential receiver twos. But really, he doesn't have the consistency of that position to put him above a threshold that he's going to need to pick up a consistent amount of wins to really challenge for the wild card. And then the tight end, Mike Gesicki, he's primed to take the starting tight end role in Miami. But unless he has an Ingram-like season, I don't see him really making the leap to the playoffs this year. So I think he's maybe one more year away. If Davis breaks out, if Godwin gets the opportunity, this team could, be very solid. Plus, we've got a good receiving class coming next year. If he adds one of those guys as well, we could be talking about Bulwer in the divisional challenge next year. But for this year, I think he's still in the chaos as a ladder. But again, the chaos associated with those receivers, if they break out, we're looking at a playoff team. If they don't, we're looking at probably a not a top 10 pick, but just due to the points that those backs and those quarterbacks should put up, but probably a team around, say, 12 or 14. Anyways, moving along, House Payne. I'm sorry, not House Payne. House Dondarian. How could I forget the commish? Jeez, terrible of me. Anyways, ranked 22nd, we have House Dondarian, newly branded commish. He's going to hate this, but again, he truly did take an Aaron-like approach to rebuilding this team, getting his first rounder back and getting a lot of picks from breaking things down last year. But instead of making those picks, he traded them. So again, he turned Barkley into Henry, Thielen, and Cooks for me. He also got Rivers from me for one of those late picks, and then I think he also got Bortles from somebody I think he got Bortles from Tyrell for one of those picks as well. So really did a good job of not necessarily making the picks he acquired, but turning them into good production. At this point, he's looking there with 2 quarterback ones from a fantasy perspective. I don't expect anyone to look at Bortles as a QB1 from a real life perspective, or as a top 16 quarterback from a real life perspective. He's got 3 wide receiver 1/2s, guys who are probably in that 12 to 14 rank, which are wide receiver 1s, but again, based off of other league formats, are considered 2s. And then a tight end 1 with Delaney Walker and a solid set of running backs. So I don't think he's going to be ready for the playoffs this year, but I don't think he's going to be cast-immune either, which is going to be interesting because I don't think he has many of his picks for next year, but I don't see an easy way for him to make the jump to the playoffs or to, really have this team grow for the next couple of years because he's picked up a bunch of veterans. So he could prove me wrong, get to 8 or 9 wins, and that'll potentially push for I believe it's the Crownlands. But that being said, I think this is still a team that is probably a third best team in his division. Now we're talking about House Payne, who's 21st. And seriously, if you're looking to acquire a 2018 rookie running back, I think if I don't have him, Payne probably does. Looking at his roster here in the draft, he's added Geis, he's added Michelle, he's added Jones. He had Williams from Green Bay, but frankly, he just got a lot of the big name guys outside of Barkley. So good for him. From a quarterback perspective, has Ryan and the returning Luck. So 2 likely QB1s there. Like a couple of others in this tier, big concern is the wide receiver position. Martavis getting a role in Oakland, I think gives him that opportunity to be maybe that wide receiver 1 everyone's hoped he could be. I think that's still a long putt or a tough putt, but there's potential there. What happens with Cobb? Does he come back to be the wide receiver 2 for Rodgers, or does he continue that slide that he's had the last year? Tyler Lockett is a popular name now that Richardson's out of town to pick up some targets in Seattle. Again, they signed Brandon Marshall, so maybe not as many as initially, but a name that could be rising. And then Cortland Sutton probably is a year away. But point being, between that and then some uncertainty at the tight end position, we think, I like what Payne has. I think, again, he's in that same spot as Bulwer is, that in a year we may be having a different conversation about this team. Two solid quarterbacks and good points from the running back position, but really needs to address the receiver and tight ends before he's ready to make the leap. Now, I'm very happy, but he's not going to be, that I have him ranked 20. It's House Reed. So, again, middle of the pack placement, which he's going to hate. So he's probably going to go around and break up Adams, break up Rodgers, and turn himself into a competing team again because he hates missing the playoffs. But based off the picks he made, I think they're all going to need about a year to develop before he's back in contention. I mean, looking at it, he picked up Mayfield, who's in a camp battle with Tyrod Taylor. He's got Nick Chubb, who, again, with Hyde there, who knows how many carries he'll get. Then at the receiver position, picked up Washington and I believe Mike Williams. Again, Washington probably needs a year or so, and then we're not sure what really Goodwin is going to do. And then same story with Gesicki. So next year, I think Reed's going to be back in the playoff conversation, but not quite yet, despite having probably a healthy Rodgers and Adams within a few weeks for him. Next up, we have the Faceless Men. First and foremost, again, this is a team that really got hit with a stroke of bad luck in terms of his quarterbacks this offseason. Just a moment. Cool. So looking at it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe even pre-draft, he had potentially four starting quarterbacks with no one knowing what was going on with Luck's shoulder. Brissett could still get that job in Indianapolis. Bridgewater was looking good in OTAs or optional OTAs. Basically could get the job in New York, and then Tyrod holding off Mayfield. But nowadays it's looking more and more like he's going to have one quarterback, which is unfortunate because the rest of that lineup is pretty solid. Of Trubisky, Freeman, he's got Hunt, Alshon Jeffrey, Juju, Will Fuller, and either Hooper or Doyle, depending on who he wants to start at tight end. So that's a pretty solid lineup with some elite pieces there. So if he gets that second quarterback, either through trade or through some luck, he rises and he's back in the playoff conversation. But he's going to be another one watching the camp battle closely. All right, so moving on to the 18th ranked team. And he's probably a little bit upset that I haven't said his name yet, but it's House Mallister. Again, this is no longer Wode. Alex has rebranded as Mallister. And look, he may be upset I ranked him this high, but this is a pretty solid team. Again, much like a couple of the others I've mentioned recently, Newton and Mahomes doing a great little 1-2 and still pretty young players at quarterback. Added the other copy of Saquon. Then Jordan Howard, A-Rob, Corey Davis, Sterling Shepard, and Everett. That's going to win quite a few weeks. I could see him easily making it to 6 or 7 wins this year based off of just that. Now, the depth behind it is still not what it needs to be, so he's not ready to really be in the playoff conversation yet. And again, he's done a very conservative and methodical job of building this team back from what it was. But look, hats off to you. That's going to be a fun team to watch and a tough team to play. So I don't recall whether I would have to face off against Mallister this year or not. I'd have to double check the bylaws, but frankly, I don't think I want to. So enjoy. Then on to 17, the last of the bottom tier, and it's the first of the Estes and Doran teams we'll be talking about. It's Sand Snakes. Now, maybe I'm being a little bit biased. Maybe my ranking system's off. Call it whatever you will. But seems how Sand Snakes has 21 wins over the first 2 seasons and has made the playoffs both years, it's probably a bit of a tough putt to get him to the bottom half of the league. Let me try. So what he's always done is relied on the elite running backs, Bell, Gordon, Shady, and now his new addition, Royce Freeman, to carry him and put up that floor of points, as I think Lewis put it last year. You can expect a floor of 60 between Bell, Gordon, and Shady, and then pick up cheap production elsewhere. He's got He's got Landry at receiver. He's got Keenum at quarterback. So he's probably looking at about a floor of 80 points on a week-to-week basis, which is pretty solid. Excuse me. The problem is, again, his tight end is a work in progress, and he really doesn't have anything reliable yet. Now, he's got good pieces. I'm not, shitting on his team. Bradford could win that job in Arizona, but how long is he going to hang on to it? Freeman probably needs a little bit of time to win the job in Denver. If he does, this team immediately moves up into the playoff tier. And then, like I talked about with Cobb, who knows what that's going to be, Galladay and Stills. Guys that Galladay and Stills could put up big weeks. Galladay should be being brought along a little bit further, but still not guys that can be consistently counted on. So, look, I expect this team to get to 7 wins at least based off of just the running back core, Keenum and Landry. But again, chaos being a ladder, a lot's going to depend on how long Bradford holds the job, how long Freeman takes to win the job, and then whether Galladay or Cobb can ascend to give him another option. And then also, he's got Luke Wilson, who's, I think, slated to be the new starting tight end for Detroit. Who knows what's going to happen there? So, again, chaos being a ladder. If chaos breaks the right way and he's able to continue making the right small moves with later-round picks to get that production, he could see 10 wins again. If it breaks the other way, then I could see him going into a sell fest. And I'll tell you what, if he puts any of these running backs up for sale, people are going to be knocking down that door to buy, especially considering the running back world we live in now. All right. Let me just – that gets us halfway through. Let me double-check on a couple of things here. All right. I still have time, so I will not break this up quite yet. We'll go into the 16th ranked team, which is House Tully. Tully, again, is another team methodically building. Really kind of, I think as I had in my trade archetypes, I had one kind of focused on Tully that either it was going to be you're there or you're not in a trade. And it wasn't going to be a massive back and forth, low balls going each side. If it's a low ball, he's not talking to you. If it's in the range, he'll tell you what he'd pay for it. And if it's not that, then don't waste your time. But again, another team that has built around young receivers and been unfortunately disappointed in that regard. But I think is ready to compete this year. So Tully's got Carr and Eli, so should have good quarterback production, probably a nice floor of 30 there. He's got McCaffrey, Chubb, and Kerryon Johnson, which again should be a solid core of running backs. Receiver, he's nothing magical here, but good upside and good depth with Aguilar, Josh Gordon, Tyler Lockett, Devonta Parker, and Sammy Watkins. So could easily see him rolling a lineup of 3 of these guys with wide receiver 2 floors and wide receiver 2 upsides from a week-to-week basis. And then Ingram just owned everybody last year. He's one of the elite guys at tight end. I could absolutely see him putting up things this year, especially with the connection with Eli. He would get the stack points there anytime they score. So this is one of those teams that, again, putting them against, I think, kind of right beside Snakes is a good exercise here because you're going to see Snakes with a higher floor from a week-to-week basis, but each of these receivers that Tully would be able to put out there can get that long pass on any given play. Now, obviously, anyone can catch a bomb and take it to the house. I think Hooper had an 81-yard reception last year, so that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is these are all guys who are deep threats at their positions. So I think they're good floor receivers, but they also have good ceilings as well. So because of that, I have Tully ranked slightly, I mean ever so slightly, above Snakes at this point. But again, this is a team that I think is a little bit away still. Needs the situation in Cleveland and Detroit to break the right way. And then at least one of these guys at receiver to ascend to a consistent wide receiver 1 if he wants to be in the playoff conversation. All right, top 15 time. Number 15, House Fell. He's been just adamant about having his 3 receivers throughout. I'm not 3 receivers, 3 tight end, 3 quarterbacks. Hey, third time's the charm. Throughout Flacco, Stafford, Winston, which gives him a good base to go from and should protect him from most bye weeks. But then he's really built around that with youth, and from not really making many trades, just small trades based off of where he started with the startup. So running backs of Mixon, Royce Freeman, and Williams, I think solid there. We're not sure what the Chris Thompson role is going to be in Houston, especially with some of the videos recently with guys taking work in the passing game. So I don't think it's that running back one he was last year, but probably still in running back two conversation, but very high variance. Receivers, Cooper, Hogan getting a bump with the element suspension, Lee, D. Jackson, Doxson. A good young group with a lot of upside, especially if Doxson can step up in his third year, and if Hogan can really hang on to that role with Edelman out, could be pretty sexy. And then Njoku and Burton at tight end. No one's quite sure what Burton's going to be in Chicago. Could he be a move guy, or does he move into a Kelsey type role, because that's where Nagy came from? So questions to be answered there. And then Njoku, great ceiling, but didn't have a ton of opportunity to show it last year. Still a growing piece. But across the board, fellas looking pretty balanced, pretty solid, with some good depth. So can absorb some injuries and still be coming back and being competitive. Now, again, it's going to be very dependent on whether Mixon and Royce make that jump for whether or not he's a playoff team. Right now, I'm taking worst case scenario with basically everybody. But again, I think he's still probably a year away from really challenging for the Storm on its crown. All right, back to Essos and Dorn, the third team in this tier. So I misspoke earlier. Faceless was the first Essos and Dorn team. I think he was 19th, Snakes at 17, and then Santee running out the tier at 14. Again, I think this is a team. Santee's done a very methodical job of rebuilding this year. He was another team who had to buy back his first last year when things weren't going his way. But again, I think is above average at each position and has producers, even though they're not sexy names at each position. Case in point at quarterback, Dalton and Tannehill. I think everyone expects Dalton to put up QB2 numbers as well as Tannehill. But if you look at the last season, Tannehill is fully healthy. He was a QB1. So I think, like I said, with Tyrell, a lot's going to depend on what Tannehill comes back from the injury. Does he still have mobility? Does he still have the running game points from that side? And then with Green getting up in age and not as many weapons as he had before, can Dalton still put up, a 4,000 yard plus, 25, 30 touchdown season? If he can, he's a low end QB1, high end QB2. If he can't, then, this ranking comes down a little bit. Also lucky with some of his offseason moves. Alex Collins is lead back. Sonny Michel, following him, I think he was very pleased with that. I know he really likes Michel. And again, I think the New England backs are going to be tough to predict. He's got Michel and Burkhead, so he should have, again, it'll be a matter of can he pick the right one on a week-to-week basis, but he should be able to really tap into that New England running game, which is a very profitable place to be. The real strength of his roster is at receiver. Amari Cooper, T.Y. Hilton, Marvin Jones, Emmanuel Sanders, Willie Snead. He's got 4 wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 guys right there. So on a week-to-week basis, he's probably getting 60 points from his receivers. If he gets, 30 or 40 from his tight end, from his running back and quarterback, then you're looking at a 100-point team on a week-to-week basis. And I told you what 90 points would do in the schedule that I had last year, and Santee would have, I think, an identical one, with his exception of my team instead of his. But point being, if 10-4 at 90, 100 maybe gets you 11-3. You're in the conversation. So I think there's still a lot of uncertainty around, whether Collins has any challenge from Dixon. Can Amari make the breakout to be the player he was, or is he kind of relegated to that receiver 2, receiver 3 level? Jones and Hilton were receiver 1s last year, or receiver 1s when they're at their top. Can they be again? I know Galladay is concerning some Jones owners. Sanders is probably in his last year with Denver. What's he have left? But again, this is another team that you could see him putting up 100 on a weekly basis, or if the receivers break badly due to, again, chaos, he could see himself needing another year to build it back. So I think that rounds out the chaos as a ladder tier quite nicely. All right. Quick sip of water, and we are into the next tier, which is the tournament challengers. All right, let me take a look at chat, please. Do, do, do. All right, Malister, that's the that was the reaction I was hoping for from the 18th rank. Thank you. And then we're going back to the rankings here. So ranked 13th, and again, not necessarily in the playoffs, but I think in the playoff hunt, and he's in this position every single year. It's Evan. It's House Royce. Again, he's got Cousins, who he's in love with at the quarterback position. Jed Silver got his boy Darnold. So again, same kind of situation as with Casterly. If Darnold starts, I think this Rainey comes up a little bit, and he's in a much better position. If not, then he's going to be on the edge of the playoff competition here. But again, if Darnold wins the job week 4, week 6, there's a lot of variables in how he competes. Again, he's got Zeke and Drake, which, again, with Drake missing much of the competition, should be a fine 1-2 punch at running back. Evans and Thomas as the elite receivers, Crowder and J-Matt as the lower-end, high-upside guys. Crowder disappointing you last year. Matthews with a great opportunity to step into that slot role that he really owned in Philadelphia. Had a little bit of trouble with in Buffalo, but with Edelman out, could really see some points there. So I know he'll be fingers crossed that breaks well, as well as at tight end position. He's got ASJ, who that's one thing we noticed in the playoffs last year. Bortle loves going on the tight end, so great upside there. And then OJ Howard took a bit of a hit with the Braid extension. It's going to be tough to start him on a weekly basis. I know a lot of the downfield work is still going to go to Howard, but it's not something you can really rely on. So that's why I have him 13th right now. I think he's going to be right there at the end based off his receivers. He's going to be putting up the points, but really probably I have him falling just short this year. And again, who knows? With injuries that have happened in the past, he may slip his way into the playoffs based off the points for a third consecutive year. But again, that's going to need a little bit of help from my regard. All right, 12th. So we're in the playoff teams now. White Walkers makes his return. So King 1 year, 4-10 the next year. Definitely wants to make his way back to the promised land here. Literally, since he's the White Walkers. Really, he's going to be led by his quarterbacks, Rodgers and Breeze. Probably one of the most formidable, if not the most formidable, 1-2 punch in the league. Running backs are really his Achilles heel right now. McKinnon and Gore. As another McKinnon lover and guy who's going to be starting McKinnon, great landing spot, great turn of luck for him. Question is going to be from a Gore perspective. Like I said, Drake didn't get a ton of challenge in Miami. What's Gore's role? No one's quite sure because it's not necessarily. Is he a spellback? Is he a is it a 1A 1B situation with Drake? A lot of questions yet to be answered from minicamp. Receivers: Hilton, Hogan, Demaryius Thomas. And John Brown, I believe it is. So decent receiving core, guys who really attack deep. Hilton does seem to get the targets that he's not just a deep threat, so that should be solid. And then last but not least, the return of Olsen. So team that was really hurt a lot last year by the injury of Luck, which brought down Hilton, the injury of Olsen, the injury of Rodgers, which really led to the tough road he had. That being said, is poised for a big comeback this year. Again, is in Beyond the Wall, which is a very difficult place to be, especially with children and free folk there, who I haven't even mentioned yet. So that should give you a pretty good idea of the level of competition he's got. But I would say he's probably my favorite for the points wild card, just because of his quarterbacks on a weekly basis, the points that his receivers can put up, and then what should be average production at the running back position and above average at tight end. All right, on to 11. 11 and 12, actually, 11 and 10, I have tied. So maybe we'll just call it tied for 10th. And it's very apt that they're tied because they're also in the same division. It's House Targaryen and House Swan. So I'll start with Targaryen because he's first in the list here. He's got Matt Ryan, Big Ben, so good quarterback production. Melvin Gordon at running back, so good running back production. Two lead options, I feel, in Evans and Diggs. And then Sammy Watkins, who, as I mentioned earlier, is probably in that wide receiver 2 range, but we'll definitely see some wide receiver 1 weeks when Mahomes hits him deep. And then one of the best tight ends, if not the best tight end in the game, Gronk. And then the potential starter, again, still a long way to go, but Virgil Green is still the starting tight end on the roster in San Diego at this point. So Definitely adequate at each position with the elite play at receiver. Potentially could prop him up. Swan, on the other hand, again, Brady and Jimmy, so two very good quarterbacks. They're pretty even there. But whereas Targaryen has relied on his receivers, we could really expect to see Swan rely on her running backs, Bell, Kamara, and then White. But Bell and Kamara are the big names there. Anytime you're rolling out two probably top 6 running backs in draft rankings, you're doing pretty well. You've got a nice little floor to start from. Average receiving play, Garcon, Galladay could take a jump. Ridley, she paid up for. So again, some potential there. And then Emmanuel Sanders. We'll see where that goes. But last but not least, tight end, whereas Targaryen is really relying on Gronk being the big piece. She's got 3 options like Kittle, Walker, and Nick Vannett, all players who should be starting in very good positions. So that combination is pretty adequate there. So again, I think it'll come down to the battle of the running back versus the receivers there. So take your pick. But those are the 10th and 11th team. And Jeremy, I'm so glad you could join.
Yo, what's up?
Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, about 10 minutes before I have to take my kids to school. So,
all right. Well, I'll talk about your team because I've ranked you already. I had you ranked 20th. What's your reaction to that?
That's ludicrous.
I was going to say you're immediately going to go trade all of your rookies for competitive pieces to push for the playoffs, right?
I don't know. I'm at that point with the roster where it's like, okay, I did the tank last year for the picks, and I don't know. I feel like I just got to coast this year with a mediocre team, and then we'll see what happens afterwards. I don't really have too many old guys left to trade, though.
No, I mean, the thing I was saying about your team is it's not that it's a bad team. It just, I think, needs a year because it doesn't sound like Mayfield's going to start immediately. Again, we're not in camp yet. That could change. Chubb is a little bit of an uncertain situation with Hyde still in town. Then your receivers, Washington and Williams, I think, need another year, and then Gesicki probably needs another year. So that in place, you have 5 guys who are going to be very solid for you, but just need a year. So
yeah, I'd agree with that. I think all of my rookies basically need a year. I need Duke to walk, although he just got signed for.
He got extended.
Yeah, so never mind on that. But maybe for Hyde to walk.
Yeah, well, Hyde could get cut next year for basically nothing.
And maybe the Green Bay situation gets a little bit more clear if Aaron Jones just kind of takes it. But yeah, I kind of agree with you. I have a few guys that I probably need to unload this year, like Gio, Marquise Goodwin. I don't know, but I mean, it could surprise you. I mean, some of these guys could just surprise us and do well, and maybe I do somehow squeeze in the playoffs. I really doubt it, but it's possible. I think just if he needs another year too, obviously, he's not having a great camp so far.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the goal there was getting him because he has the highest upside, not necessarily because he's going to be the first one to start. So I think that's probably true maybe for all of these quarterbacks. But I like where your team sits. It just, like I said, probably needs a year. Are people making free agency claims right now? First come, first serve?
I have no idea what's going on with waivers.
Yeah, it looks like people are adding guys off of waivers. So you guys are trying to power rankings and you're adding players right now. You're screwing everything up.
Well, they're screwing themselves too because I'm sure that Lewis is going to just drop them without re-adding any of the people they dropped. Or if I don't know if people are spending money or if it's just completely open right now. But
there was bond bidding that happened for sure. But first come, first serve is supposed to be. I don't think that's open right now. So I haven't checked chat, but we'll see.
I mean, Lewis is not in a forgiving mood right now if anybody hasn't been paying attention. So if you're doing stuff like that, you're just screwing yourself.
Yeah, it's not the right time to really push him. But we can talk about that some other time. Anyways, moving on to the 9th team. And I'm glad you're on for this because this is probably going to be one of my more shocking rankings that I've placed here. And one I'd love to get your reaction to. It's Children of the Forest at 9th.
Let me go look at his team. I mean, he had an awesome team last year too, right? So
he had an awesome team last year, but I would say the team that had the worst luck with the offseason this year is probably him. Paid up for Stafford, which again solidifies that QB position. But then, word out of camp is not good for Howard. Hyde is probably buried and gone next year.
Hyde is outside best ball leagues. He's a scary guy to have right
Yeah.
now.
You got Allen and DeAndre Hopkins, and then Crabtree with the Houston role, but then the receiver depth's not what it was before. And then you've got Kelsey, which is fantastic at tight end, and then the depth's not quite what it was. So he had some depth last year, and I feel like his depth got worse, and Howard got worse. So
Not have any picks this year.
I think
I don't see any rookies.
I think he moved them. Yeah, I think he moved his first last year, so I don't think he had any picks. But then I think he also moved his 19 picks already in part of the deal to get Stafford. So again, it's one of those teams where he's strong enough that he's still going to be in the playoff conversation, especially in Beyond the Wall. Again, it's going to be tough with walkers and free folk in there. But look, I mean, he needs a little help. He needs Howard to prove everyone wrong again. He's kind of the Jarvis Landry of the running back position. He keeps getting dissed on every year and keeps producing. But point being, he needs that, or else he's really, playing with one hand tied behind his back here, because his starting 8 is Dak, Stafford, Howard, Allen, Hopkins, Crabtree, Kelsey. I think that's only 7, so he still needs an 8th starter.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, also, if he takes one bad injury, we can say that about everyone, I guess, but the depth, just like hold on.
No problem.
So like one key injury to one of his running backs, and I don't know, it's end of game.
All right. Well, it does sound like you need to go. I appreciate you joining us if you could. Sounds like the natives are getting a little restless, but like I said, I'll plan that we get a follow up to this with the full crew on in the next week or so. We can react to the second half of the draft as well as these rankings.
All right, sounds good. Nice talking to you, Mike.
Cool. Take it easy. All right, on to the 8th ranked team, House Greyjoy. Again, a team that is a perpetual winner in the Riverlands. I think some of us in other more competitive divisions are jealous because Greyjoy's kind of high-stepped to titles there the last 2 seasons, and will likely do so for a 3rd, and has been slowly rebooting his team for some youth, not with huge trades, but his team's looking pretty solid. He's got Cam Newton and Ben Roethlisberger, so a little bit of age at quarterback. Running backs are pretty stacked with Cook as the front runner, but then a bunch of intriguing guys. I know we just kind of talked about Hyde being tough to own, but again, could find himself some relevance. We're not quite sure what Cleveland's doing from the starter perspective. Marshawn Lynch should put up some numbers, as well as Dion Lewis in his new position. And C.J. Anderson is a person who's returned to relevance. So a decent running back core, not necessarily one that I would feel fantastic about, but with headlining by Dalvin, I think he's in a pretty good spot. Receivers, Tyreek, who will always be on this team, and Larry Fitzgerald, so good there, and then Gronk at the tight end position. So another team that, again, is going to have some trouble on a week-to-week basis identifying who the last starter or 2 is going to be. Again, obviously Cam, Ben, Cook, Hill, Fitz, and Gronk are chalk. But then which of the 2 running backs or potential depth at other positions he adds to round out his starting lineup. So another team that I expect to win his division, so that's why I have him in the playoff contenders. But I don't think this is a team that really makes it out of the first round, especially considering some of the strength in the ice division without major reconstitutions to this roster. Although, like I said, pickups are happening right now. Whether they stand or not is going to be, probably not. But he did pick up Dorsett, so maybe that's what the missing piece is at the receiver position. And then last of the competitive, not competitors, the playoff contenders, I think it was, where I have our friend Old Tom Maesters, who I think actually makes the playoffs this year. So good stuff, guy. Welcome. I don't think he wins the reach. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I think he's got a solid set of quarterbacks. Again, he can wait on Mayfield because he has Watson and Winston. Running back, he's got Leonard Fournette, and then he's got a bunch of handcuffs. So not as strong as it could be, but again, if injuries happen, this is a team that is going to feel the benefit of that. Receiver, Devontae Adams, Demaryius Thomas, Will Fuller, and then Cortland Sutton. So Sutton's probably going to be a year away, but should get good production from Adams, Thomas, and Fuller. and then also has Olsen coming back from injury, and has ASJ, who I mentioned I think is going to do some good things in Jacksonville. The point is, I think that team should be strong enough to get him into the playoffs, and then especially if some injuries happen and those handcuffs become starters, knowing Maestros will be able to build out that roster with a little bit more depth, or flip those into future or upgraded pieces, and as another major trader, really be in a good position, especially come winter. So I think Maesters makes the playoffs this year, unless something crazy happens. And again, I can't even say something crazy happening to say Fournette because he has Yelvin. So we'll have a lot of fun this year with Maesters being in the playoff hunt. All right, moving on to number 6 in our next tier. These are the lords of the region. So the difference here between the playoff contenders and the crown, I have this middle tier because I think these teams are good enough to compete for a bye. I think that they'll, again, win their divisions, but I don't think they're really in the short set to win a title. And as I kind of talk through each, I'll kind of point to where I feel the piece they have to improve is for them to really jump into that next tier, or where they're at risk of falling down either into the wild card tier or out of the playoffs altogether. So the 6th ranked team I have is House Baneford. King Baneford. It's probably blasphemy for him not to be in the top tier, even though he's the king right now. But I'll take that risk because it's just us talking. Really, he's never going to find out. Quarterback Goff and Bortles. Running backs Gurley, Fournette, Hunt, and Mack. Receivers really are Jeffrey and Juju, and then very strong at tight end with Ingram and Ertz. That said, if you look at this team, the depth at tight end helps, and I know he started 2 tight ends a couple times last year. I think there's a lot of people around the community who are expecting Goff to regress a little bit. That last year was kind of an aberration. That step forward usually comes with a small step back. So again, he could fall down, and then Bortles is still a bit of an unknown. Like I said, he's put up quarterback 1 numbers in the past, but it's a player you don't love to rely on. That 3-headed backfield of Gurley, Fournette, and Hunt has been great for him last year, but does Hunt take a step back with Ware coming back? Big question. And then really it's a matter of that quarterback and that receivers. Look, he's elite at the other 2 positions, but those are important spots, and I don't know if he can really compete with some of the guys above him. So, granted, if he's got his trade bait up that he's got, I think, half those guys I just mentioned, he's willing to move. Blockbusters that let up group me. So, you guys who are on the bottom tier who want to get King Banefort back to the championship game, let's get him going. All right, number 5. And the 3rd highest ranked team in ice. It's nice. These last 6 were alternating fire and ice. So from the north, and who I predict to be North champion, is House Forrester. So again, he's trying to rebuild on the side here without blowing things up, but it's going to be tough with some of the players. But still, he's got production for days. Breeze and Rivers at quarterback. The Ingram injury hurts at running back, but he's also still got Shady there, which should be able to get him at least to the first 4 weeks and beyond. Receiving core is the best in the league. There's no competition anymore. It's Allen, it's Antonio Brown, it's Julio Jones. He's got Devontae Parker too, but again, those big 3, that's just super sexy. And then Jimmy Graham and Vance McDonald made a great deal with me at the deadline last year, moving Murray to me for Jimmy Graham. I thought Jimmy was washed up, that he was going to get replaced and go out to the scrap heap, and then he gets linked up with Aaron Rodgers, which is awesome. So, again, I need to go back to really observing the rule of do not trade with Forrester. But again, I seem to not be able to help myself. So good on you there. But point being, outside of, say, running back, a Shady injury could cause a lot of trouble for Forrester. I think that would force him to move the first round pick or potentially blow up one of the other elite pieces he has if he wants to stay in the race. But top to bottom, injuries aside, I think this is really the team to beat in the North, and a team that's going to push the other 2 ice teams for that number 2 bye. So again, good on you, Forrester. You're always in this top 5, especially as long as you have those receivers. But again, that That's it's going to be tough to maintain, especially with Breeze and Rivers getting up in age. So again, I hate talking nice things about myself on podcasts. Those of you who are in GMs who saw that podcast, you saw was self-deprecating to a extreme level with my team, saying I was worst. But here I am at number 4 here, so I'm not the top tier. But again, I think I'm moving the right direction. Talking about my roster, Brady and Cousins are my main quarterbacks. Saquon, McKinnon, and Penny as my running backs. Baldwin, Diggs, Fitzgerald, Fontes, and Landry as my receivers, and then Kittle and Hooper as my tight ends. I think from where I'm the weakest perspective, I have a lot of risk at the running back position. I'm reliant on Saquon really stepping in and being that elite piece immediately. Penny gets, I think, some of the most immediate opportunity, which is why I went that direction when I picked him. But again, there's questions in terms of his third down blocking. How long is he on the field? Is he a 2-down back? And then McKinnon is a quick riser, and many are thinking that he's risen too high and he's too close to the sun. As a 49er fan, I think they're all full of shit. But look, I like him, and I think, but again, there's risk there. So at the running back position, there's risk, and then at tight end with Kittle and Hooper. I think, I'm expecting Hooper to take that next step in year 3. Kittle looked fantastic last year and could take that next step, especially with the state of the 49ers offense this year. But again, there's a lot of unknown at those two positions. So I think my quarterback play and receiver play will carry me, and then I need my running backs to really step up if I think I'm going to really push for a title. But I think with the youth and everything, I'm set for the long haul. Plus, I think I'm probably the class of Ethos Endurance. So I've now just jinxed myself and will finish last. And congratulations, Bayless, for having that pick, which will be top 5. So you'll really be able to rebuild with those two pieces. But point being, I round out the Lords of the Region at number 4. So that gets us to the crown competitors. I think one team is far and away the lead, but definitely from the ice perspective, I expect Free Folk to push them. So I have Free Folk ranked 3rd. How did I get in there? Because quarterback, running back, and receiver are just too damn sexy. Wilson, Goff, and Keenum at quarterback, Zeke, Freeman, and Ingram at running back. So even the Ingram suspension doesn't hurt him that much. AB, Hills, and Hearns at receiver, and then Rudolph and Everett at tight end. So, look, I think AB and Hill are receiver 1s this year. I think Zeke and Freeman are running back 1s this year. I think Wilson is a QB1 this year. The 2s and the tight end are probably a little bit less impressive than the top 2 teams. But that said, I expect this team to be in the 120 range on a week-to-week basis and tough to beat. So anytime you're putting up that kind of those kind of points, you get in the playoffs, home field advantage, things break the right way. I could easily see Free Folk coming out of beyond the wall as not just the winner of the division this year, but as a league champion. All right. As for the team I have ranked first in Fire, okay, you haven't heard his name yet, so you'll probably be able to guess. It's Hightower. Went the three young quarterback route. Had to wait a couple of years for them to really come of age, but Mahomes, Mariota, and Jimmy should be again in that rotation of QB1s, and the depth there. Make sure he has 2 on a week-to-week basis. So very strong there. The addition of DJ at running back, as well as the Tennessee backfield, he should be pretty well set at running back. The receivers are just may push Forrester either next year or after for top receiving core, but OBJ, Baldwin, Woods, and Rashard Matthews. So never mind, outside of OBJ, it's not really the same sexiness, but again, very strong receiving core, and then Ertz at tight end. So he's not weak at a position. He can roll out 2 QB1s, DJ, if one of the Tennessee backs get injured, the other one is immediately, in my opinion, a running back 1. He could roll out, again, 1s at each position, except maybe he would need a 2 at running back and receiver with Woods and the Tennessee back. So point is, anytime you're going 1s at each position, you're probably a favorite. So pretty good stuff for Hightower. And then, to no surprise of anyone, I have Harding as the favorite at this point based off of his recent trade for DJ. So really, I'll go through the lineup there. Wilson, Dak, he's got Flacco, but Flacco's likely losing his job to Lamar Jackson this year, in my opinion. So that could get worse. But point being, Wilson and Dak is a pretty solid way to probably top 10 quarterbacks. Running back, Gurley and DJ. I mean, come on, you probably got 2 of the top 3 backs this year. That's just stupid. Receivers, Hopkins, AJ Green, Golden Tate, Dez, and Edelman. Dez not having a job, and Edelman bring him down a little bit, but D-Hop, Green, and Tate are a pretty good 1, 2, 3, and then Kelsey and Graham at tight end. So really, he's going to be on a weekly basis, starting the 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and then cycling in as he needs to between Graham, Tate, and then some of his other depth like Gore. So the 8th starter is probably something he still needs to think about. It's probably not going to be the same from a week-to-week basis, but his top 6 is better, as good as, if not better, than anyone in the league. So again, injuries happen, so this could change, but I think he's far and away the favorite for the league right now. And that does it for us. So let's see. I think I've been going for an hour and a half, something like that. I haven't really been following the chat too closely, so hopefully you guys have been enjoying this. We'll get this posted on YouTube, and then Jeremy will convert this to the pod so we can post that on SoundCloud as well for those who follow that way. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As mentioned, we'll look to follow up in the next week or so with the second half of the draft reaction. So I think there's rounds 3, 4, and 5, as well as reactions from Jeremy, Lewis, and Eric to these rankings. And then if some of you want to join as well, that'd be great. So hope you guys enjoyed. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.